The wind that swept across the battlements of Dragonstone carried with it the scent of salt and brine, the weight of old histories that seemed etched into every stone of the fortress. The towers rose like grim spears over the narrow sea, their black walls shaped by ancient Valyrian arts, a testament to House Targaryen's once fabled glory. In the great hall, where tapestries bearing three-headed dragons rustled in the ocean gusts, two small children ran in playful circles, their laughter echoing among the pillars and across the mosaic floor. One was Rhaenys, dark of hair and bright-eyed, her Dornish heritage plainly visible. The other was her younger brother, a boy with silver-gold hair, lively and alert, who balanced on the cusp of a name that was both a privilege and a secret. He was called Jaehaerys by many within the castle's walls, though only a select few knew the truth of his birth. To him, Rhaegar Targaryen was father, and Elia Martell was mother, and all his early memories were wrapped in the warmth of their voices. He knew nothing of the hush that followed when the lords and ladies of the court looked upon him, for he was too busy chasing shadows across the floor or giggling with Rhaenys beneath the watchful eye of Sir Willem Darry, who guarded them both like a hawk. In a far corner, close to the flickering torchlight, stood Prince Rhaegar himself, half hidden by a thick tapestry of a dragon in flight. The silver-haired prince observed them in silence, a gentle expression illuminating his normally pensive face. He had not taken his harp this evening, nor was he dressed for courtly presence. He wore instead a simple doublet of black velvet with the dragon's sigil embroidered in subtle silver thread. When Elia joined him, her slender hand slipping into his, the pair watched as the children spun around Rhaenys' nursemaid, who feigned indignation at their mischief. Outside, storms gathered, as they often did around Dragonstone, and the thunder was a distant growl that seemed to vibrate through the ancient walls. The power of the storms never unsettled Jaehaerys. From the time he could walk, the boy had been fearless, especially when accompanied by his sister. Many of the older servants muttered that the storms themselves were drawn to the Targaryens, as if some cosmic bond existed between them and the elemental fury of the sea. On nights like these, the lightning would illuminate even the deepest corners of the castle, revealing glimpses of hallways seldom traveled and locked doors behind which dust and secrets had gathered for centuries. Rhaegar walked to the children, his boots echoing. He knelt and rested a hand gently on each child's shoulder. Rhaenys looked up with a grin, her hair in small braids bound in gold ribbons, and Jaehaerys turned with wide eyes, silver hair falling across his forehead. They had been playing some grand imaginary game, and the excitement still danced across their faces. Rhaegar asked them about this story, and Rhaenys began describing how the carved dragons on the wall were really sleeping lizards, waiting for the call of a dragon lord, while Jaehaerys nodded solemnly, not wanting to interrupt. Elia approached, her dark eyes alight with affection. She had endured many trials to be here, to stand with her husband and children in peace. Though her features bore the regal softness of Dorne, her resilience was as unyielding as any sand-swept fortress. Her health had been fragile once, but under Rhaegar's close attention, and the calmer life they now led upon Dragonstone, she had found a slow but steady renewal of strength. There were days when she worried for the boy who was not of her blood, yet who was hers to cherish as much as the others. The ghost of Lyanna Stark was a silent presence, an unspoken truth lying like a single thread of tension beneath the tapestry of their family. But love, Elia believed, could conquer a great many things, even old grudges and whispered rumors. The secrets had been carefully managed, known only to the most trusted retainers and sworn to absolute discretion. The child was safe here. More than that, he was loved. Night descended fully, pressing a deep gloom over the fortress. Torchlight elongated the shadows in the corridors, and the sound of footsteps or quiet murmurs traveled unexpectedly through the walls. Rhaenys and Jaehaerys were ushered upstairs, their nursemaid leading them with bedtime stories that set both children's imaginations racing with images of knights in shining armor, princesses locked in tall towers, and dragons who soared over open skies. The older maids had grown accustomed to young Jaehaerys' eagerness to hear tales of old Valyria. He loved stories of the dragon lords and their strange, glittering spires of magic that shimmered in the air like starlight. He would drift off to sleep imagining those lost wonders, his small hands clutching the corner of a blanket embroidered with his father's sigil. In a chamber warmed by a crackling hearth, Rhaegar and Elia found a rare moment of privacy. They spoke in hushed tones, not wanting to wake the children in the adjoining rooms. Rhaegar's voice held its usual quiet intensity, and Elia's carried a subdued warmth, like a gentle breeze across desert sands. They discussed matters of the kingdom, of the king's behavior in King's Landing, and the uncertain ripple that such behavior sent through the high lords of Westeros. They discussed their children too. Rhaenys was blossoming into a graceful girl, certain to become a bright presence at any court. And Jaehaerys, that secret child, who was so unafraid of the sea storms, who had an uncanny calm about him even when thunder shook the windows, seemed to grow stronger by the day. Elia asked if Rhaegar worried about the prophecy, the one that had drawn him down a path fraught with heartbreak and violence. Rhaegar sighed, a distant look in his violet eyes. There had been so many regrets, and so many hopes pinned on the legends of ice and fire. He spoke of it with a sorrowful reverence, as though it were a burden that weighed on his heart more than a vision that fueled him. But he also gazed into the fire, remembering the moment he first held the boy, the moment he recognized something in the child's eyes that spoke of both winter chill and dragon flame. He had told Elia that it felt as if the entire realm's destiny might pivot around that fragile life. Elia listened, unwavering in her support, yet harboring her own doubts in the privacy of her thoughts. She did not fear the child. She feared what others might do if they uncovered the truth. She feared what might happen if Jon Jaehaerys grew up into a realm that questioned his claim, or if the king's madness ever found its way to him. Yet for now, he was safe, and the walls of Dragonstone stood firm against the winds of the world. Days passed in the hushed rhythms of castle life. Jaehaerys rose each morning to the soft call of gulls outside his window. Often he would run to the narrow slit and watch the sea churn below, the water's dark surface flecked with white foam. With Rhaenys, he'd rush to lessons conducted by Maester Culliper, a round-bellied, patient man who smelled faintly of parchment and rose oil. They would practice their letters, read from old scrolls that recounted the Targaryen conquest, and, when the morning sun reached a certain angle, they would move to the courtyard to learn swordplay from Sir Willem Darry. Rhaenys would sometimes complain, wishing her lessons involved a real sword instead of the blunt wooden ones. Jaehaerys only smiled quietly, his hands gripping the practice blade with surprising precision for one so young. He felt no special destiny in his limbs, only a readiness to learn. He did not recognize the worried glances that passed between Sir Willem and the other guards, nor did he notice the subtle undercurrent of curiosity that some of the servants directed at him. To the boy, Dragonstone was home. Its labyrinthine corridors were a playground, the rookeries a place to watch ravens flutter and croak, the hidden chambers a source of endless fascination. Once, he had stumbled on a locked door deep in the bowels of the fortress, its iron handle so cold it felt like ice in his hand. He had tried to peer through the keyhole, but saw only darkness. For days afterward, he asked everyone who would listen if they knew what was inside, but all he received were shrugs or soft admonitions not to wander. So the locked door remained an enigma, one more secret in a castle filled with them. At midday, feasts were modest but comforting. Elia, still careful about her health, often hosted small gatherings in the solar where warm sunlight broke through high windows, illuminating the deep blues and reds of the tapestries. She would invite a few ladies-in-waiting, some traveling knights petitioning for the prince's favor, and occasionally the fisherfolk from the nearby town who came to present their best catches. Jaehaerys was not always in attendance. Rhaegar preferred that the child not be paraded unnecessarily, but sometimes the boy would slip in with Rhaenys, each carrying half a honey cake, giggling as they passed behind older lords who bowed to them with bemused smiles. The hush that fell whenever Jaehaerys entered was something he was too young to understand. The collective intake of breath from those who sensed a mystery about him, hidden behind the Targaryen silver hair and the Dornish lady's quiet acceptance. Yet, in those moments, the boy was nothing but bright-eyed, munching on sweets. perhaps offering a crumb to a friendly cat lurking under the table. When Rhaegar visited the halls or courtyards, the men-at-arms stood straighter, respectful of the prince and the rumored might of his sword arm. But Rhaegar's presence was far from overbearing. He often moved with a certain quiet grace, his mind drifting in places others could not follow. At times, music drew him away from the concerns of daily rule. He would retreat to a private chamber where his harp waited, a finely wrought instrument of pale wood and silver strings. On such afternoons, the haunting melodies of his composition would fill the upper halls, lilting and solemn, as though the castle itself listened raptly. Occasionally, Jaehaerys would slip into the corner, silent as a mouse, to watch his father play. He would be struck by the emotion on Rhaegar's face, the longing, the devotion, the sorrow that seemed woven into every chord. The boy did not comprehend the depth of it, only that it flowed from something vast and serious within his father's heart. Sometimes, Rhaegar would notice him, and a ghost of a smile would soften his features, beckoning Jaehaerys to come closer. The boy would, shyly, and kneel by his father, listening to the music until it faded into the hush of the castle air. Evenings at Dragonstone were a tapestry of candlelit corridors, and hearth fires that coaxed the damp chill from the old stones. The flames danced on walls adorned with dragon motifs, throwing flickering shadows that made the beasts appear alive. On these nights, the storms outside grew in intensity. They lashed the sea with relentless fury and rattled the window panes with howling gusts. Jaehaerys loved these storms. He would watch the flashes of lightning from the safety of a high window, counting the heartbeat between the electric brilliance and the thunder's roar. Elia would sometimes find him perched on a window seat, mesmerized, his own breath catching at the spectacle of nature's power. She would wrap a blanket around him, cautioning him not to lean too far. Then she would stroke his silver hair, whispering the lullabies she had once sung to Rhaenys. In those intimate moments, Elia felt the weight of secrets lighten, replaced by genuine warmth for the boy who had been entrusted to her care. Rhaenys, for her part, was rarely content to watch from the sidelines. She had a streak of boldness that shone through her every gesture. Once, when a particularly violent storm rattled the gates, she insisted on running to the courtyard in her bare feet, arms outstretched, to feel the rain upon her face. Jaehaerys followed, though he hesitated, peering through the archways to see if grown-ups were watching. Rhaenys tugged him along, dancing in circles, water dripping from her dark braids, while the wind whipped their clothes like battle flags. Thunder cracked overhead, and they both squealed with a mix of exhilaration and fear. Sir Willem found them moments later, hastily draping cloaks over the children as they fled indoors, soaking wet and laughing despite being scolded. The memory stayed with Jaehaerys. The smell of wet stone, the taste of rain on his lips, and the echo of thunder in his bones. Late one night, long after the children had been tucked into bed, Rhaegar met with a small group of trusted knights and advisors in the war room. A heavy table dominated the space, carved in the shape of Westeros itself. Candles stood in clusters, dripping wax that solidified into strange formations on the table's edges. Rhaegar's eyes roamed over the painted mountains and rivers, pausing on regions known for unrest. He spoke quietly, though urgency sharpened his tone. Whispers from King's Landing hinted at the king's declining state, at paranoia and cruelty that grew bolder with each passing month. They also spoke of unrest in the Stormlands and the North, of lords who may be too proud or too desperate to remain idle under a mad king's rule. Rhaegar did not speak of war openly, but the possibility hung in the air like the scent of smoke after a distant fire. The others around the table, hard men with swords at their hips, listened with grim faces. They nodded at the prince's words, acknowledging the precarious balance that kept the realm from descending into chaos. In Elia's chambers, a dim light glowed beneath the door as she lay awake. A book open on her lap, but unread, her thoughts drifting. She feared war, for war had nearly torn her family apart once before. She feared for her children, especially Jaehaerys, whose destiny might attract more danger than he could ever know. But when at last she laid her book aside and eased herself into slumber, she reminded herself that the present moment was safe. Her children were safely asleep. Dragonstone stood as a shield against the storms of the realm, both natural and political. Jaehaerys's dreams, on that very night, were filled with images he could not yet understand. Whirling snow in a far northern land, the echo of a wolf's howl, a glimmer of sunlight on steel, and a flicker of dragonfire that turned the darkness crimson. He awoke in the early hours, disoriented, and found Rhaenys snoring softly in her own bed across the chamber. Hearing no footsteps in the corridor, sensing no immediate danger, he wrapped himself in a blanket and padded to the window. The sea was calmer now, bathed in moonlight that shimmered on every wave. For reasons beyond his grasp, a gentle peace settled over him, and he returned to bed. Morning broke with a clear sky, and the fortress hummed to life. Servants hustled about their tasks. Knights gathered in the courtyard to drill. Jaehaerys and Rhaenys joined them to continue their sparring lessons. The sound of wooden swords clacking filled the air, punctuated by Sir Willem's exhortations for them to keep their guards up. Rhaenys attacked with passion, while Jaehaerys displayed a more methodical approach, each strike carefully placed as if guided by unseen logic. "He's got a steady hand, that one," Sir Willem remarked to one of the lesser knights. "You can see the prince's blood in him, sure enough." Rhaenys's playful taunts pushed Jaehaerys to improve, but she was never cruel about it. She would laugh and dance away when he swung, his short arms struggling to keep up. Yet each time, he got a little closer, a little faster. The courtyard training sessions became a fixture of their life, something they both looked forward to, despite the bruises and scrapes. Sometimes Elia would watch from a balcony, smiling quietly to see them so united. The Targaryen sigil flew from the highest tower, and beneath it, the children trained in earnest for the challenges that might one day test them. When the midday sun grew too hot, they scampered to the shade of an arcade, where a cool breeze rolled in from the sea. A servant appeared with a tray of lemon water and sweet biscuits dusted with cinnamon. Rhaenys told stories of how she would one day ride a dragon. She had read that the old Targaryens all had dragons, she insisted. And if they could do it, then so could she. Jaehaerys listened, enthralled. He asked if the dragon still slept beneath Dragonstone, perhaps in some hidden cavern or locked room. Rhaenys laughed, saying if that were so, she'd find them one day and wake them up. Jaehaerys could be her co-rider, she declared, and they would soar beyond the clouds, and no storm could ever frighten them. Jaehaerys, a half-eaten biscuit in hand, agreed with a nod, though he wondered if dragons would like sweet biscuits too. That afternoon, Rhaegar found them wandering the library wing, searching for old tomes about dragons. The prince's expression was both amused and thoughtful. He promised that one day he would show them the tombs and crypts beneath the castle, ancient places carved into the rock where the Targaryen ancestors had once kept relics and perhaps even eggs of petrified dragons. Rhaenys clapped her hands in delight, while Jaehaerys' gaze lit up like a newly stoked fire. They had seen the carvings of dragons in the throne room, and the mighty dragons on the Targaryen banners, but to think that real dragons had once grown and flown from these very shores. It was more exciting than anything the boy could imagine. As evening came, they gathered in a small drawing room where a blazing hearth combated the lingering chill. Elia held a small gathering, inviting Maester Culliber, Sir Willem, and a few ladies of the court to talk and share music. Rhaegar played his harp, and the gentle notes drifted among them like a soft breeze. Rhaenys eventually dozed off in a cushioned chair, her head resting on the armrest, while Jaehaerys leaned against Elia, his eyelids growing heavy. Rhaegar's ballads told stories of lost Valyria, of the doom that shattered an empire of dragonlords. The sorrow in each chord seemed to speak of the weight of old sins and the price paid for hubris. For Jaehaerys, the music was a lullaby that beckoned him into a half-waking dream where he saw towers of fused stone, swirling with arcane energy, and dragons dancing across skies streaked with fire. In his drowsy state, he thought he glimpsed Rhaegar watching him with a mild, knowing smile, though he couldn't be certain. Late that night, after the children had been carried off to bed, Rhaegar and Elia stepped onto a secluded balcony. The moon was high, and the sea stretched out in shifting shades of silver and black. From this vantage, the fortress appeared even grander, its turrets and gargoyles etched in pale moonlight. A hush lay over Dragonstone now, though. No feast, no music, only the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks below. Elia rested her head on Rhaegar's shoulder as he wrapped an arm around her. For a time they simply breathed together, letting the quiet of the night envelop them. Eventually, Elia asked if he thought the realm would truly hold, if the king's madness would remain contained. Rhaegar, in a voice tinted with resignation, said that as long as possible, they would maintain peace. He confided his fear that eventually, events would spiral beyond his control. He spoke of the weight of the prophecy, the significance of his children, especially the child who bore winter in his blood, along with the flame of the dragon. The realm was vast, Rhaegar mused. Its fate could shift with the changing winds, and the burdens of destiny were not easily cast aside. Yet in that moment, with Elia by his side, the only certainty was the love that bound them to their children and to one another. Dawn broke gently, illuminating the horizon with a faint pink hue that gradually gave way to pale gold. Jaehaerys awoke to the soft calls of servants preparing the morning meal. A wave of curiosity tugged at him. He had dreamt again of the locked door in the depths of the castle, of a faint glow beneath it this time, and the echo of distant roaring. His feet carried him to the corridor outside his chamber, past Rhaenys' door, and down the wide staircase leading to the great hall. The place was nearly empty so early, though the servants hurried about, setting tables. A yawning guard nodded respectfully at the boy, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Jaehaerys descended further, past a pair of statues depicting dragons perched on pillars. The stone beasts looked fierce in the early morning light, their claws extended as if to protect something behind them. He meandered through dim hallways, the air turning cool and slightly damp. He found himself in a part of Dragonstone where the spiral staircases were narrower, the passages less traveled. It felt as though the castle itself were guiding him, a silent invitation urging him onward. His pulse quickened. He was not sure what he sought, but the air tingled with mystery. He passed a few locked doors, each triggering a pang of recognition from his dreams. Eventually, he came to a broader set of stairs leading down into a drafty corridor lined with flickering torches. The shadows shifted oddly here, and every step echoed in a way that made his heart quicken. At the far end, just before a sharp turn, he saw a door left ajar. Not the same one from his dreams, but something else. He peered inside. It was some manner of storage, with old crates and torn banners, dusty and forgotten. The flickering light made shapes dance across the walls. He nearly jumped when a voice spoke from behind him. It was Maester Culliper, breathless from the climb down. The older man gently scolded Jaehaerys for wandering alone in such a hidden part of the castle. He guided the boy back upstairs, away from the drafty tunnels. "Some places are filled with hazards," the Maester explained in a kindly tone. "Loose stones, old pitfalls. It is not safe without a torch or a guide." Jaehaerys apologized quietly, feeling a bit silly, though a lingering hunger for discovery gnawed at him. Culliper ushered him back toward the livelier parts of Dragonstone, where the morning light spilled through high windows and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the kitchens. After breakfast, Rhaenys teased him about his little exploration, though she too was curious. "If you go again, you'd best bring me," she insisted. Jaehaerys promised he would. They spent the rest of the morning in lessons, reciting the history of Aegon's conquest and the forging of the Iron Throne. Rhaenys occasionally yawned, while Jaehaerys diligently copied passages with a quill. Maester Culliper praised his handwriting, remarking that for one so young, he showed admirable patience and focus. The boy glowed under the compliment. The day unfolded lazily. By mid-afternoon, the children were free to do as they pleased. Rhaenys dragged Jaehaerys to the tower that housed a modest rookery, where ravens perched and croaked in the rafters. One of the birds, a gray-streaked old raven with a chipped beak, cawed at them indignantly, as if offended by their presence. The children laughed, tossing scraps of bread the Maester had given them. Rhaenys spoke to the raven as though it could understand her, telling it elaborate tales of how one day she would fly too, just like them, only on the back of a dragon. Jaehaerys added that if he found a dragon egg, he would make sure it hatched, and the raven only cocked its head as though weighing their words. In the courtyard, Rhaegar was sparring with Sir Willem, moving in a blur of steel. Observers marveled at the prince's fluid grace and impeccable footwork. Elia watched discreetly from a balcony, pride shining in her gaze, tempered by a slight concern that her husband would push himself too far. Jaehaerys paused beside Rhaenys to watch. Every clang of sword against shield resonated in the boy's chest. He admired the strength and elegance of it. Rhaegar, noticing the children, offered them a brief, warm smile before returning to the mock duel. Sir Willem, though skilled and robust, was clearly outmatched. When Rhaegar at last disarmed him, applause rose among the few onlookers, and the prince stepped back, offering his hand to the knight. Sir Willem accepted it with respect and faint exhaustion. Jaehaerys felt a surge of admiration, mixed with a peculiar sense that he, too, could learn to move like that. Something lay dormant in him, a confidence that one day he might prove worthy of a blade, of a name that would be spoken alongside the great Targaryen princes of old. For now, though, he was just a child, scurrying off to help Rhaenys chase cats through the stable yard. As dusk approached, the sky turned a brilliant lavender, tinged with orange along the horizon. The sea gleamed like molten metal, and gulls wheeled overhead, calling out in shrill voices. Lamps were lit throughout the castle, their soft glows dotting the windows like scattered stars. Dinner was taken in a small hall, a quiet affair with only the family and their closest attendants. Elia encouraged Rhaenys and Jaehaerys to recite something they had learned from their lessons, and the children dutifully did so. Rhaenys spoke a verse from a song about Nymeria's voyage to Dorne, while Jaehaerys recounted a short passage about Aegon the Conqueror's earliest battles. Rhaegar listened, nodding approval, though his mind seemed slightly distant, as if another concern tugged at him from somewhere within the castle walls. When the meal was done, the children were sent to retire early. Another storm was brewing outside, the wind already howling against the shuttered windows. Thunder's grumble grew louder, rolling across the sea and shaking the glass in its frames. Elia accompanied Jaehaerys to his chamber, tucking him beneath heavy blankets. He looked up at her, silver hair falling across his eyes, and asked if the storm scared her. She smiled softly and shook her head. "No, sweetling," she said. "Not while we're safe inside these walls." And she kissed his forehead, smoothing the covers around him. The storm raged on, but Jaehaerys felt comforted by her presence. He listened to the pounding rain and the throaty thunderclaps. Instead of fearing them, he imagined them as the roars of distant dragons calling out across the sea. In that half-drowsy space before true sleep, his dreams mixed with the real. Flashes of a wolf's eyes in a dark wood, a swirl of snow, and then the warmth of a dragon's fire. He shifted restlessly, murmuring half-formed words. The thunder boomed, and the wind swept through the arrow slits, making the candles flicker. Then the presence of something, he did not know what, seemed to settle near him, like a protective force or an unseen guardian. He breathed deeply, the moment passing, and slid into deeper slumber. Midnight arrived with a great crash of thunder that shook the tower. Rhaegar stood on a rampart overlooking the sea, drenched by rain, hair plastered to his cheeks. He was alone, having ventured out to feel the storm's raw power. The lightning turned the sky white, revealing the rolling waves below in that split second of brightness. The prince closed his eyes, letting the rain wash over him as if seeking an answer from the tumultuous heavens. He recalled words from old prophecies, from scrolls hidden in the Citadel's archives, from the dreamlike convictions that had once spurred him to do things he regretted. He did not yet know how all the pieces would fit together, only that they must. The thunder muttered again, and he raised his face to the storm, like a supplicant at an altar. Perhaps in some strange way, the storm answered. Inside, Elia lay awake, waiting for him to return. She worried about him, the depth of his internal struggles, the guilt and determination coiling in his heart. She felt certain that if he could, Rhaegar would shield his family from every danger in the realm. But destiny had a will of its own. So she waited by a modest fire, a robe drawn around her shoulders, listening to the storm rage outside. Her thoughts drifted to Jaehaerys, that gentle boy with a hidden lineage, and she prayed for the realm to find peace, if not for her sake, then for his. Eventually Rhaegar returned, soaked to the bone. She helped him out of his wet garments and laid a warm blanket around him. He did not speak of the storm, only met her gaze with tired eyes, as if to say he was here, he was trying, and he would not yield. She pressed a hand to his cheek, and in that quiet gesture they found a moment of understanding. The storm began to ease in the early hours, the thunder moving on toward distant coasts, leaving only the steady drizzle of rain that softened into a mist by dawn. Jaehaerys awoke, stretching his arms, blinking at the pale morning light filtering through the narrow windows. The air smelled fresh, cleansed by the night's tempest. He felt that something had shifted within him, though he could not name what it was. Only that a new day had come, and with it, a sense of anticipation. He dressed with the help of a page, then hurried to find Rhaenys. Together, they would greet the morning, share breakfast, and maybe, if they could slip away from Maester Culliper for a while, they would embark on a new adventure through the castle's winding corridors. He found her in the corridor outside her room, fiddling with the ribbons in her braids. She caught sight of him and grinned, beckoning him to follow her. Down the stairs they went, heading toward the great hall, their laughter echoing in the stone passages. Even the gloom of Dragonstone could not dim their youthful spirits. For Jaehaerys, every echo was an invitation, every shadow a hint of something more. And so he would step forward, guided by quiet determination and unwavering curiosity, unaware of the grand currents of fate that stirred far beyond these walls. At that table where the family gathered for breakfast, the flames danced in the hearth, and the last traces of the storm glistened on the windows. Rhaegar was already seated, sipping mulled wine, his thoughts heavy but his smile genuine as the children approached. Elia sat to his right, her posture regal yet comforting. The conversation was mild. Small remarks on the storm, inquiries about the day's lessons, a playful squabble between Rhaenys and Jaehaerys over the last honey pastry. It was the tapestry of a quiet life, meticulously woven day by day, even as greater destinies hovered just outside the fortress walls. For now, within these ancient stones, a boy named Jaehaerys was simply a child among dragons, cherished and protected, drawing upon both winter's quiet strength and the fiery heritage of the Targaryens. And though whispers of prophecy might trouble his father's mind, for the moment, a mother's love and a sister's laughter were shield enough against the perils of the world. The soft sunlight that filtered through the high windows touched every inch of the hall, illuminating motes of dust that swirled in lazy patterns. At the table, where remnants of breakfast lay, a cluster of fruit, a half-eaten pastry, a jug of water, Rhaenys and Jaehaerys leaned close. She clutched a hair ribbon in one hand and gestured animatedly with the other, describing some grand plan. The boy nodded, more cautious, still waking from half-remembered dreams. Elia watched them with a gentle smile, occasionally sipping her tea. Rhaegar stood by one of the arched windows, staring out at the sea, as though gauging whether the clearing weather would hold, or if more storms would sweep in from the horizon. Before long, Maester Culliper appeared, bowing respectfully, the chain around his neck jingling. He had come to guide the children to their morning lessons. Rhaenys popped up from her chair, enthusiastic about the day, while Jaehaerys lingered a moment longer, gazing at the steam rising from the still warm pastries. Rhaenys teased him about hoarding the last one. He grinned in reply but chose to leave it for another time. Thus summoned, they both followed the Maester into one of the smaller sunlit rooms adjacent to the library. Within, high shelves crowded with scrolls, the corners scattered with bits of old parchment, and a smell of ink and dust that seemed comforting. Culliper began with reading practice. He selected a weathered book detailing the heroic escapades of Serwyn of the Mirror Shield. Rhaenys attempted to read passages aloud, stumbling over some of the more archaic words. Jaehaerys followed along, his gaze drifting now and then to the window, where the day beckoned him. Culliper insisted they focus on proper enunciation. Rhaenys struggled with her RES, while Jaehaerys recited the lines with slow, deliberate care. Outside, gulls circled the battlements, cawing. The children's minds wandered to the feel of the open courtyard, or the next adventure that might take them into the lesser explored corners of the fortress. After an hour of such studies, the maester dismissed them for a short break. They ran into the corridor, Rhaenys in the lead. She spun around in a swirl of her skirts, hair ribbons catching the light. Jaehaerys chased after, nearly tripping on a loose flagstone. They scrambled up a narrow staircase that led to an unused turret room. The door at the top was locked, but Rhaenys peeked through the iron grate, whispering that one day they would find a way inside. Jaehaerys tried to peer into the gloom beyond, but saw only flickers of dust in a sunbeam that angled through a slit in the wall. When they heard Culliper's voice echoing up the stairwell, they hurried back down, breathless with excitement, as though they had touched the edge of a mystery. The rest of their lesson took place in the library proper, a grand chamber full of old shelves, tall windows, and cushioned chairs. Culliper spoke of the wars in Dorne and the forging of alliances that had eventually brought House Martell into the realm. He touched on matters of heraldry, quizzing them on which houses bore animals in their sigils, and which used inanimate objects. Rhaenys found it more intriguing than Jaehaerys did. She liked to imagine each sigil as part of a story, weaving battles and love tales around the shapes and colors. Jaehaerys, less fanciful, kept his brow furrowed, quietly memorizing the details. Baratheon had the crowned stag, Tyrell the golden rose, Martell the sun pierced by a spear. He wondered how many of these lords might someday cross his path. The realm felt so vast that Dragonstone, for all its winding halls, seemed but a small island in a sea of unknowns. Outside the library windows, the day grew warmer. The courtyard beckoned, and so did the sea beyond, sparkling in the midday light. At last, Culliper closed the tome he'd been referencing and declared their studies complete until the morrow. He reminded them both to practice their penmanship, but the children were already halfway out the door, bounding down the hall in search of freedom. They found it in the courtyard, where Sir Willem Darry awaited them with 2 wooden practice swords. Rhaenys grabbed hers at once, brimming with confidence. Jaehaerys came forward more slowly, but his eyes gleamed. Around them, other knights and guards were busy with drills, the clang of steel resonating in rhythmic strikes. An undercurrent of energy charged the air. Perhaps it was the fresh aftermath of last night's storm, or the cheer of sunlight after days of gloom. Jaehaerys liked the tang of it, the sense that everything was alive. Sir Willem began with footwork, coaxing the children to pivot and parry. Rhaenys attacked with swift, bold strokes, forcing Jaehaerys to move defensively. He responded with careful counters, aiming to deflect, more than to strike. Sir Willem chuckled at the contrast in their styles. He reminded Jaehaerys to keep his grip firm, his elbows in, then urged Rhaenys not to overextend. Despite the frequent corrections, they both shone with determination. Sweat glistened on their brows, and now and then, a knight practicing nearby would pause to watch, smiling at the young royals. There was a sense of pride in seeing them grow. A few footmen swapped coins, betting good-naturedly on which child would win the most touches in these playful duels. Elia observed from a shaded arcade, her expression serene. She sipped a chilled drink of lemon and honey, occasionally exchanging light conversation with a lady-in-waiting. Her gaze remained fixed on her children, especially the boy who had come to her under hushed circumstances. A swirl of protective affection coursed through her as she watched him concentrate on each parry. He took each instruction seriously, as if every movement were significant. Now and then he threw a glance her way, and his face lit up when he caught her smiling. Rhaenys, meanwhile, performed for the crowd, eager to hear the smatter of applause that followed her spirited lunges. When at last Sir Willem called an end to the session, both children were left panting and exhilarated. Rhaenys declared she'd won, but Jaehaerys insisted the score was even. Sir Willem, with a paternal pat on their shoulders, reminded them that victory was not always about scoring hits. Often, it was about learning. Rhaenys pouted in half-feigned dismay, but soon she was laughing, hooking her arm through her brother's and dragging him toward the water barrels to splash their flushed faces. After a light midday meal, the children scattered. Rhaenys went to visit her mother, who was meeting with a seamstress in the solar, discussing fabrics for new dresses. Jaehaerys wandered along the outer walls, drawn by the sweeping view of the sea. The fortress stones under his palms felt warm from the sun, a pleasant contrast to the ever-present gusts of wind that tugged at his hair. He found a quiet turret where no one else seemed to be. A place to lean against the parapet and stare out at the horizon. The ocean stretched endlessly, glittering under the late afternoon light. He imagined sea monsters lurking beneath the surface, hidden kingdoms of fish and coral. He thought of the locked doors within Dragonstone, the old stories about hidden passageways and secret vaults. He let his mind drift, picturing dragons roosting in caves deep below the fortress, waiting for some call. A sudden flurry of gulls erupted from a ledge nearby, startling him. He leaned over the parapet to watch them scatter across the sky. In that moment, he wondered what lay beyond the sea. What distant lands or fortunes might await. He was a boy with Targaryen silver hair, yet not truly Targaryen. He was the realm's most carefully kept secret, though he did not know it. All he felt was a nameless pull toward something larger. Below, the gates of Dragonstone swung wide to admit several riders. Jaehaerys squinted, seeing flags or banners he could not immediately identify. He scrambled down from the turret to find a better vantage. In the courtyard, stable hands rushed forward to take the newcomers' horses, and a herald stepped up to greet them. Jaehaerys spotted the coat of arms on one of the riders, the golden spear piercing the sun. His heart quickened at the sight of House Martell's sigil. Though he knew Elia's family hailed from Dorne, he had never met many of them, only hearing stories of their desert strongholds and the colorful swirl of life by the sea. He edged closer, weaving through the cluster of onlookers, to see the arrivals dismount. At the head was a tall figure of striking presence, his cloak a bright orange that rippled in the breeze. It was Prince Oberyn Martell, known through rumor for his fiery temperament and skill at arms. Beside him rode a small retinue of Dornish men. They were met by Rhaegar himself, who descended from the steps with Elia by his side. Formal greetings passed between the adults, polite but warm. Oberyn embraced his sister lightly, inquiring after her health. Elia offered a fond smile, though she looked both pleased and concerned to see him. They exchanged whispers, and Oberyn's gaze flicked across the courtyard, taking in the watchers on the walls. Jaehaerys did his best to appear inconspicuous, but eventually, Oberyn's sharp eyes found him. For the briefest moment, a quizzical look crossed the Dornish prince's face. Then his features softened into a polite, close-lipped smile. Rhaenys came rushing out, calling excitedly for her uncle. She collided with Oberyn in a flurry of giggles and exclamations about her sword training, her new dresses, and 100 other details. Oberyn laughed, hoisting her up briefly. He was all flashing white teeth and genuine affection. "Little niece," he said, "you grow so tall, I'll soon need a stepladder to greet you." Rhaenys laughed, wriggling free to show off her wooden sword which she'd brought from her lessons. Jaehaerys kept his distance at first. He felt uncertain, a stirring in his chest that was both excitement and caution. Elia beckoned him with a gentle motion. He stepped forward, lowering his eyes. Oberyn studied him as one might observe an unusual bird. When the boy finally raised his gaze, their stares met. Jaehaerys thought he sensed curiosity, perhaps even calculation, in the man's eyes. But Oberyn's words were soft. "This must be my nephew as well." Elia gave a faint nod, her tone careful. "Yes, this is Jaehaerys." She placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "My youngest." Oberyn's brow quirked a fraction, but he smiled. His voice carried a trace of amusement. "He seems serious." "He's a thoughtful child," Elia replied, standing a bit straighter. "He does well in his studies and in his training." Oberyn's gaze flicked to Rhaegar, then back to Jaehaerys. He extended a hand, ruffling the boy's silver hair. "Well met, nephew. We shall have to see about that sword arm of yours, perhaps." A swirl of color and laughter followed as Oberyn and his retinue were led inside, servants bustling to prepare rooms for the Dornish visitors. Rhaenys insisted on showing her uncle every corner of Dragonstone, chattering away about each tapestry and suit of armor. Jaehaerys trailed along, quiet but absorbing every word. He noticed how smoothly Oberyn charmed each guard or servant they passed, and how fiercely protective he was of Elia, fussing over her health despite her calm assurance that she was well. Rhaegar walked a measured pace with them, offering occasional comments about the fortress's history. Once, when Rhaenys ran ahead, Oberyn slowed to walk beside Jaehaerys. He asked the boy a few pointed questions about his training, about the books he liked to read. Jaehaerys answered politely, though beneath the surface he felt a kind of pressure, as if he were being tested. Oberyn flashed him a sudden grin, showing his white teeth again. The conversation moved on, but Jaehaerys' pulse took a while to settle. That evening, a modest feast was held in honor of the Dornish guests. The great hall came alive with the glow of torches and the scent of spices. Musicians played soft melodies on lute and drum, the notes echoing off the high ceilings. Servants circulated, bearing trays of roasted fish, spiced with pepper and lemon, and pitchers of Dornish red wine. Elia wore a deep red gown that set off her dark hair and eyes. Beside her, Oberyn was a burst of color in his orange cloak, brimming with lively banter. Rhaegar, for once, seemed less withdrawn. He wore a subtle smile as he listened to the Dornish prince regale the table with stories of tourneys and Sunspear. Rhaenys laughed openly, especially at her uncle's wilder tales. Jaehaerys, seated next to her, partook of the feast quietly, savoring the new flavors. The Dornish dishes had more heat than he was used to, and at one point, a particularly spicy bite made him cough. Oberyn clapped him on the back, laughing as he offered a cup of watered wine. "Easy, nephew. It's only pepper, not dragonfire." Jaehaerys blushed and took the cup gratefully, drawing a small chuckle from the other diners. He listened to Oberyn speak of the Water Gardens, a place in Dorne where children of all stations played together in shallow pools under the watchful eye of the ruling family. He spoke of the heat of the sun, the dryness of the desert air, the crisp nights under star-studded skies. Jaehaerys found himself imagining a land of sun-kissed walls, swaying palm trees, and elaborate fountains. For a moment, he felt a pang of envy for Rhaenys, who shared that heritage in blood and spirit. Later, as the plates were cleared and the musicians shifted to a slower tune, Elia and Oberyn stepped aside to talk quietly. Rhaegar watched them from across the hall, a hint of tension in his stance. Jaehaerys sensed that even though the adults maintained pleasant faces, something more serious brewed beneath the surface. Rhaenys was telling her own story to a group of knights, describing how she would soon be old enough to ride a real horse in the lists. Or so she insisted. Jaehaerys nodded at her words, though he was half listening, his gaze drifting back to where Elia and Oberyn stood. When at last the feast drew to a close, Oberyn bid them all a good night, with a bow and a flourish of his cloak. He eyed Jaehaerys thoughtfully one last time, then swept out in search of his assigned chambers. Rhaenys, yawning, allowed her nursemaid to lead her off. Jaehaerys lingered near Rhaegar and Elia, who spoke softly in a corner. He caught only fragments of their words, mentions of the king and tensions, and something about caution. His curiosity piqued, but he dared not interrupt. Eventually, Elia noticed him, gave a gentle smile, and said it was time he joined Rhaenys in bed. That night, in the quiet of his chamber, Jaehaerys stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the sea. His mind buzzed with questions. Why had Oberyn looked at him that way? What secrets did the adults keep? He reminded himself that he was only a boy, too young to be burdened with the realm's worries. Even so, he felt a stirring in his heart, a restlessness that would not relent. He closed his eyes and slipped into fitful dreams of hot deserts and a golden sun, of swirling sands that seemed to reveal shapes of dragons. Morning broke in a wash of silver light. The sky was overcast, as though more rain might be on the way. Jaehaerys woke to the sound of footsteps in the corridor, servants rushing to prepare the breakfast table, knights going on their rounds. He dressed quickly, excitement flickering in his stomach at the thought of a new day with Oberyn in the castle. He descended the stairs to find Rhaenys already up and about, leaning against a carved pillar, scanning the hall with bright eyes. When she saw him, she bounded over, whispering that she had heard Oberyn was to leave for King's Landing soon, and that he might test her sword hand before he departed. They found the Dornish prince outside in the courtyard. He was wearing a sleeveless leather jerkin, his arms corded with lean muscle. A spear leaned against a nearby wall. He was talking to Sir Willem with an air of casual confidence. When Oberyn noticed the children, his smile broadened. "Have you come to do battle with me, little warrior?" he teased Rhaenys, who nodded eagerly. She lifted her wooden practice sword and struck a mock heroic pose. Oberyn reached for his spear, tapped the butt against the cobblestones, and winked at Jaehaerys. "And you, quiet one? Will you face me as well?" Jaehaerys felt a spark of both fear and excitement. He glanced at Sir Willem, who offered an encouraging nod. With a steadying breath, Jaehaerys took up a wooden sword from the rack, meeting Oberyn's gaze with as much resolve as he could muster. Rhaenys went first. Oberyn allowed her a flurry of strikes, deftly parrying or stepping aside. She whirled about, determined to land a blow. And he easily sidestepped each one, laughter dancing in his eyes. His movements were fluid, almost lazy, yet every shift was precise. After a few passes, he teased her about leaving her flank open. She gritted her teeth and tried to adjust. Jaehaerys could see the frustration mounting in her face when not a single hit found its mark. Oberyn ended the exchange with a gentle tap of the spear's haft against Rhaenys' ribs. She staggered, sputtered indignantly, then smiled despite herself. "You move too fast." "So must you," Oberyn chided, though not unkindly. "But your spirit is good, my niece." Next came Jaehaerys. His heart hammered as he stepped forward, wooden sword in hand. Oberyn assumed a fighting stance, spear angled diagonally, tip pointed at the ground. They circled each other once, the courtyard seeming to grow quieter as if all eyes were upon them. Jaehaerys attacked carefully, recalling Sir Willem's lessons about form and footwork. Oberyn blocked with maddening ease, shifting the spear in small arcs, redirecting the boy's blade. Each time Jaehaerys tried a new angle, Oberyn's spear flicked or pivoted to counter. A faint grin tugged at the Dornish prince's lips, as if he found the boy's effort intriguing. Jaehaerys felt adrenaline coursing through him. He adjusted his stance again, tried a feint that Sir Willem had once taught him, then thrust low. Oberyn glided aside, tapping Jaehaerys' shoulder from behind. The boy spun, breathing hard. He did not yield. Another exchange, and Oberyn deflected once more, stepping away with effortless grace. At last, Oberyn ceased his defensive dance and struck. In a single fluid motion, the spear whirled, hooking Jaehaerys' wooden sword out of his hand. The boy felt the sting of the spear haft against his wrist. He stumbled backward, his weapon clattering to the stones. Oberyn stepped forward, pressing the spear tip gently to the boy's chest. "Gah!" Jaehaerys' eyes went wide. His breath caught in his throat. But Oberyn merely lowered the weapon, extending a hand to help him stand upright. "You have good instincts for one so young," Oberyn said, his voice measured. "Your mind is working, I can see it in your eyes. Keep training, nephew." Jaehaerys felt relief mingled with the faint disappointment of having lost so thoroughly. Yet a small flicker of pride glowed inside him. Oberyn's words were not mere courtesy. They carried a genuine note of acknowledgement. Rhaenys offered a dramatic sigh, lamenting that they had both been bested. Oberyn chuckled, muttering something about youth and time. A small audience had gathered. A few guards, some castle ladies, even Rhaegar standing near the stairwell. The prince approached, clapping once. "You'd do both your mother and me proud," he told Rhaenys and Jaehaerys. Then he turned to Oberyn. "My thanks for giving them this lesson." Oberyn shrugged casually. "It is my pleasure, though I suspect Sir Willem will shape them into fine fighters with or without my interference." "Nay." Rhaegar inclined his head in polite agreement. He led Oberyn aside, and the two men spoke in low tones. Elia arrived soon after, her dark hair pinned up with delicate gold combs. She examined the children's flushed faces, the wooden swords lying on the ground, and Oberyn's stance, reading the scene in an instant. Jaehaerys glimpsed the flick of her eyes to his wrist, no doubt checking for any sign of injury. He gave her a reassuring look, flexing his hand to show he was unhurt. They all walked inside, heading for the solar to share a midday. They all walked inside, heading for the solar to share a midday meal before Oberyn's formal audience with Rhaegar. A gentle hush fell over the corridors, punctuated by the click of boots against stone and the occasional swirl of color from Dornish cloaks. In the solar, warm sunlight seeped through tall windows, draped with airy curtains. The furnishings here were softer than in the great hall. Plush chairs upholstered in crimson, low tables adorned with polished bowls of fruit, and a few potted plants that the servants struggled to keep alive in the chill of Dragonstone's climate. Oberyn guided Elia to one of the chairs, fussing at her to sit, to rest. She gave him a slight roll of her eyes and assured him that she was well enough on her feet. "Still," she complied, folding her hands in her lap with regal composure. Rhaenys trailed behind them, her wooden sword abandoned somewhere in the courtyard, eyes glinting with the aftermath of excitement. Jaehaerys entered last, lingering near the door. He felt the weight of Oberyn's gaze on him again, a polite yet assessing look that made him wonder if the Dornish prince saw something more than a mere child. Rhaegar took a seat on a carved chair opposite Elia, the table between them laden with platters of fresh bread, olives, salted fish, and sliced fruits from the hothouse. He gestured for Jaehaerys to join them. The boy slipped onto a bench near Rhaenys, keenly aware of how the others took up more space with their confidence, their grace. He felt small in their presence, but Elias' subtle smile reassured him. "Your spear work is legendary, Prince Oberyn," Rhaegar said, reaching for a cup of cool water. "I see the tales do not lie." Oberyn's grin showed the barest flash of teeth. "Let us say I've had plenty of practice, my prince. The sun spear has been my companion since I was old enough to hold a weapon." Rhaenys gazed at him with unconcealed admiration. "You move like a dancer," she declared. "Will you teach me someday?" "Perhaps," Oberyn replied, drawing out the word as though weighing the offer. "But I fear Dorne lies far from these shores. You'll have to journey south if you wish to learn all my secrets." Rhaenys' eyes sparkled as she pictured herself in the sun-soaked courts of Sunspear, perhaps learning to twirl a spear as deftly as her uncle. She looked to Elia for approval, but her mother only smiled in a way that revealed nothing but maternal fondness. A servant moved about, pouring watered wine for those who desired it, setting down platters with quiet efficiency. Jaehaerys accepted a slice of bread and a few olives, nibbling around the edges while the adults conversed. He listened to Oberyn talk about the roads of the Dornish marches, about how the king's efforts at expansion had unsettled certain lords. Rhaegar's face revealed little, but Jaehaerys sensed a tension there, an undercurrent that pulsed just beneath the calm surface. "You'll be traveling to King's Landing?" Rhaegar asked, lifting an eyebrow. Oberyn gave a short nod. "Indeed. I've matters to attend on behalf of my brother, the Prince of Dorne, and I'll pay my respects to his grace." He paused, fingers tapping lightly on the table's edge. "Though I suspect the visit will be interesting." Rhaegar said nothing to that, only inclined his head in a gesture of neutrality. Jaehaerys had heard rumors that the king was unwell, prone to fits of paranoia. He'd picked up these scraps from the servants or knights who sometimes spoke too freely after a few cups of ale. Elia shot a glance at her husband, the quiet glimmer of concern in her eyes, echoing everything unsaid. Oberyn shifted, his gaze sliding to Jaehaerys. "And what of you, young nephew? Do you aspire to be a warrior or a scholar?" Jaehaerys felt his cheeks heat. He swallowed the crumb of bread before speaking. I'd like to be both if it pleases." His own voice sounded tentative to his ears. Oberyn considered this with a tiny smirk. An ambitious choice, though not impossible. Some men wield both the sword and the quill with equal skill. He poured himself a small measure of wine, swirling it idly in the cup. "In Dorne, we value knowledge as much as the art of combat. Perhaps in time you'll come south and visit." "Namanuel." "Gum," Elia interjected smoothly, her voice a gentle note in the conversation. "I would like that, someday, for them both to see where my family comes from, but for now, we are content here." She glanced at Rhaegar, with a subtle emphasis on the last statement. Rhaegar's expression softened momentarily. "We'll do what is best for the children, always." Oberyn leaned back, studying them. His eyes flicked between Elia, Rhaegar, and Jaehaerys, as though piecing together a puzzle. Rhaenys, blissfully unaware of any tension, hopped up and asked if she might show Oberyn the Hightower library. Elia nodded, and Oberyn, with a flourish, escorted Rhaenys from the solar, leaving Rhaegar, Elia, and Jaehaerys together in a pool of quiet. A servant discreetly refilled cups and vanished again. Elia reached over and ruffled Jaehaerys's hair. He leaned into her hand, comforted by the gentle contact. Rhaegar watched them both, a mix of affection and gravity in his eyes. Then he glanced at the closed door through which Oberyn and Rhaenys had departed. He spoke softly. "He suspects much." Elia lowered her hand, folding it against her lap. "He's astute. He always has been." Jaehaerys did not fully understand what they meant, but he picked up on the hushed tone that clung to their words. Rhaegar turned to him with a measured gentleness. "Your uncle Oberyn is a good man, but he is also perceptive. He observes more than he lets on. You need not fear him," he added quickly, seeing the nervous shift in Jaehaerys' posture. "But it is best to remain discreet." The boy nodded, though a mild confusion rippled through him. He'd lived his entire life within these walls, taught that secrecy was normal. He sensed a difference in how people treated him, and it had never seemed ill-intended, yet the reasons remained hazy. Elias' voice broke the silence. "Go on and join your sister if you like, sweetling. Prince Oberyn will be pleased to see you both." Jaehaerys rose, bowed his head, and left them to their private talk. He wandered toward the library, footsteps echoing in the corridor. On the way, he passed a group of Dornish guards, their sun and spear emblems bright against the corridor's gloom. They spoke in low, accented voices that carried a trace of exotic warmth. Jaehaerys offered a polite dip of his head, and they acknowledged him with respectful nods. In the library, he found Rhaenys standing on a small stool, pointing at the spines of books while Oberyn read the titles aloud. They both chuckled at some of the archaic names. The tall windows allowed pale sunlight to spill onto the polished floor, illuminating floating specks of dust. A hush settled over the shelves. Here and there, a servant replaced a scroll or dusted the corners. Oberyn caught sight of Jaehaerys and beckoned him closer. "Your sister tells me you've been reading the history of the freehold of Valyria," Oberyn said, stepping aside so Jaehaerys could approach the shelf. "Quite advanced, I'd say," Rhaenys teased. "He's a serious one, always with his nose in some dusty tome." Jaehaerys offered a small grin. "I like the old stories about dragons and magic. The maester lets me borrow the scrolls sometimes." Oberyn selected a thick volume bound in cracked leather. The symbol of a three-headed dragon was embossed on the cover in faded gold. He held it out for Jaehaerys to see. "This one might interest you. It's an account of the earliest Targaryen explorers who journeyed west, written by a scribe who claimed to have glimpsed the last dragons before the doom." Jaehaerys' eyes widened. He reached for the book cautiously, as though handling a precious artifact. "I've seen references to it, but never this copy. The maester said it's old and fragile. I doubt it will bite," Oberyn said with a playful glint in his eye. "Just be gentle with the pages." Rhaenys hopped down from the stool and peered over Jaehaerys' shoulder. "Why are you always so fascinated with dragons?" He met her gaze, struggling to find the words. They can soar above everything, I suppose. And they're powerful. It's as if the whole world opens up when they take flight." In truth, something deeper pulled at him whenever he read about dragons. Some feeling of resonance he couldn't yet name. It spoke to both wonder and longing, as if a part of him recognized those beasts of flame as kin. Oberyn listened thoughtfully, then lowered his voice. "True enough. Dragons are power incarnate. But do not forget that power can be a cage as well. Many have been consumed by their own fire." "No?" Rhaenys pouted at the somber tone. "Are you trying to dampen our dreams, uncle?" He smiled, ruffling her hair. "Not at all, sweet niece. Only reminding you that all gifts bear a burden. Now, would you like to show me more of this library, or are there other corners of Dragonstone you wish to explore before my departure?" Rhaenys launched into an enthusiastic list. The rookery, the high tower, the courtyard gardens. Jaehaerys let her chatter fill the space. He held the old Valyrian tome close, feeling the texture of ancient leather under his fingertips. They decided to lead Oberyn up a narrow staircase to the tower parapets, from which one could glimpse the entire coastline on a clear day. The climb was winding and cold, the walls damp in places from residual sea spray. Rhaenys bounded ahead, fearless even on the narrow steps. Jaehaerys followed more slowly, and Oberyn kept pace behind him, occasionally steadying the boy with a hand on his shoulder when the spiral turn became too abrupt. At the top, they emerged into salty wind and a vast panorama. The sea stretched endlessly, dark blue churning with white flecks of foam. The sky hung low, as though it might rain at any moment. But for now, it remained only slightly overcast, the sun peeking through breaks in the clouds. Dragonstone's black towers jabbed at the heavens, and far below, the rocky beaches looked rugged and unwelcoming. Rhaenys leaned over the parapet, hair whipping around her cheeks, pointing out a distant ship near the horizon. "That one might be bound for King's Landing," Oberyn commented, following her gesture. "Or perhaps it's sailing north. Hard to say." The wind carried the tang of brine and kelp. Jaehaerys stepped up to the ledge, that old sense of awe washing over him. Dragonstone's heights made him dizzy sometimes, but today he felt only exhilaration. He glanced up, imagining a dragon launching into the sky from these very battlements, wings spanning over the sea. Oberyn watched him, as though guessing at his thoughts, then said softly, "I see you imagining it." Jaehaerys blinked and turned to him. "Imagining what?" "Dragons," Oberyn replied with a crooked smile. "Taking flight, conquering the skies." Rhaenys chimed in, "We both do it. I tell him one day we'll find an egg and hatch it." The Dornish prince gave them a contemplative look. "Perhaps stranger things have happened, though the last dragons died long ago, or so the story goes." Rhaenys shrugged. "Stories can be wrong." Oberyn's lips curved. "Indeed, my dear niece." They lingered there, letting the wind buffet them, each lost in private musings. Jaehaerys found his heartbeat slowing, a quiet sense of calm settling around him despite the constant gusts. For a brief moment, he felt Oberyn's hand rest lightly on his shoulder, as if offering silent understanding. Then, as quickly as it came, that moment passed. They descended the tower steps, returning to the labyrinth of passages that was Dragonstone. By midday, Oberyn declared he must prepare for departure. Rhaenys insisted on accompanying him to the stables, determined to see him off. Jaehaerys tagged along, holding the old Valyrian tome pressed to his chest. In the stable yard, grooms readied the Dornish horses. The animals were sleek, their bridles decorated with martell colors. Oberyn's retinue busied themselves checking saddlebags and adjusting stirrups. Rhaegar and Elia appeared, flanked by a pair of guards, to bid Oberyn farewell. A formal exchange of courtesies unfolded, polite and carefully worded. Elia placed a soft hand on her brother's cheek, and for an instant, the siblings shared a look of unspoken worry and love. Oberyn bent to kiss Rhaenys' forehead. "Train hard, little warrior. Perhaps next time, you'll best me in the courtyard." "Thou more," she beamed, though tears shimmered faintly in her eyes. "I will, I promise." Then she flung her arms around him in a tight hug. When he turned to Jaehaerys, the boy offered a stiff bow, unsure of the proper gesture. Oberyn surprised him by briefly placing both hands on his shoulders, stooping to look him in the eye. "Keep reading, nephew. One day you might find your dragons between these pages." Then his hands slipped away, leaving behind a confusing mix of warmth and melancholy. Rhaegar and Oberyn clasped forearms in a lordly farewell. There was a final exchange of quiet words, and then the Dornish prince mounted his horse with effortless grace. The retinue formed up behind him. With a last backward glance, he spurred his mount, and the party trotted out through Dragonstone's gates. Jaehaerys watched until they were small figures on the winding road, eventually disappearing into the hazy midday light. Rhaenys sniffled, quickly hiding her face in Ilya's skirts. Elia patted her back, murmuring that Oberyn would be well, that he was strong and clever. Rhaegar looked thoughtful, as though weighing unseen possibilities. Jaehaerys felt a strange pang of loss, despite not having known Oberyn for long. The Dornish prince's presence had stirred an energy in the castle, and now it ebbed away, leaving the fortress quiet as ever. Life returned to its routines. Lessons with Maester Culliper, practicing swordplay with Sir Willem, wandering the halls in search of hidden corners. Yet Oberyn's brief visit lingered in conversation. Rhaenys repeated every story he'd told, regaling the servants as if they hadn't heard it all already. She even took to brandishing her wooden sword more dramatically, proclaiming she would be the greatest spear maiden in the Seven Kingdoms. Jaehaerys sometimes caught the guards smiling at her enthusiasm, though they rarely corrected her. On a cool morning a few days later, Elia decided the children needed fresh air beyond the stone walls. A small party set out along a rocky path that wound around the backside of the island. Sir Willem accompanied them, along with a few other knights and servants carrying picnic provisions. The day was mild, the sky layered with drifting clouds, but no sign of imminent rain. The ocean breeze was bracing, full of salt that made their faces tingle. Rhaenys skipped ahead, occasionally calling for Jaehaerys to hurry as he hopped carefully over slick stones. They came to a stretch of black beach, where the waves lapped at a shore of dark pebbles. The servants laid out a cloth on a patch of flat ground, weighed down with small stones to keep it from fluttering. Elia settled herself gracefully, the wind teasing loose strands of her dark hair. Jaehaerys knelt beside her, drawn by the gentle roar of the surf. Rhaenys ventured close to the water, letting the foam swirl around her ankles. A guard hovered to ensure she didn't wade too far. The sky above was a shifting mosaic of gray and white. Now and then, a shaft of sunlight broke through, illuminating a patch of the sea with silver brilliance. They shared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruits. Jaehaerys noticed that Elia ate sparingly. She seemed pensive, eyes roaming the horizon as if searching for something. He wondered if she missed Oberyn or worried about King's Landing. At times she turned her gaze to Jaehaerys, a gentle sadness in her expression, as though she wished she could explain the unspoken currents that enveloped their family. Afterward, Sir Willem beckoned the children to a drear portion of the beach for sword drills. The knight fashioned makeshift target posts from driftwood and secured them in the pebbly ground. Rhaenys attacked with gusto, her wooden blade thwacking against the target. She grinned each time she delivered a solid hit, though her stance was often sloppy. Jaehaerys moved more carefully, remembering Sir Willem's advice to pivot on the ball of his foot, keep his shoulders aligned, breathe in tandem with each strike. He found a kind of rhythm in it, a flow that steadied his thoughts. The crashing waves behind them added a sense of grandeur to their small practice session. From time to time, he glanced over at Elia. She sat on a driftwood log, wrapped in a light cloak against the breeze, speaking quietly with one of her ladies. The wind carried only fragments of their conversation, words like caution and letters and arrangements. Jaehaerys pretended not to hear, focusing on his training, but the tension in the air was undeniable. When they had tired themselves out, Jaehaerys and Rhaenys collected seashells along the water's edge. The shells here were dark and often broken, shaped by the relentless tide. Rhaenys found a cluster of smaller ones with iridescent interiors. She cupped them in her palms as if they were rare gems. Jaehaerys picked up smooth stones instead, fascinated by their various shapes and shades of black. Eventually, Elia called them back, reminding them that the tide would rise soon. Their party gathered up the picnic remnants and began the trek back to the castle. They arrived at Dragonstone near dusk, footsore but content from the day's excursion. Servants helped them shed cloaks and brush away the stray sand that clung to their boots. The children parted ways with Elia in the great hall, each heading to their respective chambers to wash and rest. Jaehaerys lingered briefly by a window, gazing at the fortress courtyard where the shadows grew long. The memory of Oberyn's presence came to him again. The way he tilted his head in quiet appraisal, the confident sureness of his movements. Jaehaerys wondered if the prince was safe on the road, if he had already reached King's Landing. He imagined the grand silhouette of the Red Keep, the throngs of people, the swirl of courtly intrigues. It felt distant and unreal to a boy whose life had never ventured beyond these basalt walls. A few days later, Rhaegar summoned Sir Willem and several knights to the war room. Jaehaerys heard the echo of boots in the corridors, the low rumble of men's voices. A sense of seriousness clung to the atmosphere. He caught only glimpses: Rhaegar wearing a thoughtful frown, Elia touching his arm with anxious eyes, the knights speaking in hushed tones. Rhaenys tried to ask what was happening, but a guard politely deflected her questions. Jaehaerys felt a tingle of apprehension. It reminded him of the hush before a thunderstorm, heavy with possibility. In the days that followed, rumors circulated about the king's continued erratic behavior. Some whispered that King Aerys refused to speak to certain council members, that he'd locked himself away in the Red Keep's highest tower, or that he was threatening lords who dared question him. The news reached Dragonstone in bits and pieces, carried by messenger ravens. Rhaegar spent more time in private meetings, and when he emerged, the strain showed on his features. Elia tried to keep the children's routine consistent. Lessons, meals, occasional rides on the beach. But even Rhaenys noticed the shift. She asked Jaehaerys why everyone seemed so worried. He shook his head, unable to provide more than a guess. One afternoon, while Rhaenys was busy with a sewing lesson, to her evident dismay, Jaehaerys wandered the castle alone. The old Valyrian tome Oberyn had given him weight in his arms. He meant to return it to the library, but a capricious urge drew him down toward the lower levels. He slipped through a heavy door that led to a spiral stair descending into the depths of Dragonstone. The torch brackets along the walls had been recently replenished, so a meager light accompanied him. The steps were slightly damp, slick from centuries of salt air that seeped through cracks. At the bottom, he followed a narrow corridor that branched out in multiple directions, like roots of an ancient tree. The castle's belly was a place of storage, old crypts, and sealed rooms that few visited. He recalled the day he'd tried a locked door. Perhaps, now, curiosity would guide him to something new. The pages of the Valyrian tome pressed against his chest as he crept forward. His footsteps echoed, a soft and hollow sound. He reached a junction where 3 corridors met. He peered one way, then another. Down the middle path, the torches were unlit, leaving only darkness. A faint draft stirred the stale air. Emboldened, he stepped in. Each footstep was cautious, the corridor sloping gently downward. He noticed signs of disuse, webs in the corners, dust layered thick on the stones. At last, he saw a door at the end, reinforced with metal bands, slightly ajar. His heart thudded. It wasn't the one from his memory that had been locked tight, but the chance of discovering something hidden seized his imagination. He eased the door open, half expecting it to creak ominously. Instead, it only groaned softly, revealing a chamber lit by a single guttering torch left in a sconce. Someone must have been here recently, he thought. The space smelled of stale air and old parchment. In one corner stood a wooden rack with a few aging spears and swords, their metal heads flecked with rust. Along one wall stretched a narrow table covered in papers, unrolled maps, and small figurines used for tactical planning. At a glance, it looked like a forgotten war planning room, though not nearly as large or grand as the official one upstairs. Jaehaerys stepped closer to the table, drawn by the shapes etched on the maps. Coastline outlines, castle icons, neat script identifying towns and rivers. He set the Valyrian tome down and touched a figurine shaped like a dragon. It was carved from some dark material, the details of its scales worn but still impressive. He wondered who had used this chamber and why they hadn't come back for these items. The torch flickered, casting wavering shadows. A rustling sound in the corner made him jump. He spun around to see a small shape dart across the floor, likely a rat startled by his presence. He exhaled, steadying his nerves. Then he noticed something else leaning against a chest in the far corner. A shield, tarnished by time. The sigil upon it was hard to make out, but it resembled the Targaryen dragon. He knelt beside it, running a finger along the chipped paint. A swirl of memories, or perhaps echoes of the past, seemed to fill the chamber. The clang of armor, the murmur of strategizing voices, the weight of secrets. The fortress was old and carried centuries of conflict in its bones. He gathered his courage, searching for anything that might be of interest. The maps were old, corners curling, many of them depicting trade routes or potential invasion paths. Some had notes scrawled in the margins, referencing events or skirmishes. One bore the signature of a long-deceased Targaryen king. Another seemed to detail the stepstones to the southeast. Jaehaerys' mind reeled at the forgotten history stored down here, neglected. Why? Perhaps the official war room had supplanted this place, or it had been used by some conspirator who no longer walked these halls. After a time, he decided he'd lingered long enough. He carefully replaced the map he'd been examining, intent on leaving things as he found them. Retrieving the Valyrian tome, he turned to go, but stopped short at the sound of a soft footstep in the corridor beyond. He froze, wondering if someone else was here, or if it was just his imagination. The torch sputtered, momentarily plunging part of the room in deeper shadow. He moved to the door and peered out. The corridor was empty, lit by a single torch flickering further up the passage. Had he heard Sir Willem or one of the guards? He hesitated, uncertain. Eventually he slipped out, leaving the hidden chamber behind. As he crept along the corridor, the hush returned, broken only by a distant drip of water. Whoever had been there, if anyone, was gone. He emerged at last into the more familiar lower hallways, relieved to see a guard pass by on his routine patrol. Holding the old tome against his side, he made for the library, intending to return it and put this strange discovery behind him. But the notion of secret chambers lingered in his mind, as if the castle itself had whispered an invitation. He felt the same pull he experienced in his dreams, an urge to delve deeper, to unlock mysteries that lay coiled in Dragonstone's veins. That night, at supper, he was quieter than usual, turning over the memory of the old war room in his mind. Rhaenys chattered on about her new needlework project, complaining it was too tedious, preferring swords to needles. Elia offered mild encouragement, reminding her that a well-rounded princess should know all the arts. Rhaegar was absent, reportedly in conference with several knights about the possibility of traveling to the mainland. Jaehaerys' appetite dwindled, though he made an effort not to draw attention. Elia noticed his distraction, gently asking if he felt unwell. He shook his head, murmuring that he was only tired. Later, as the castle lights dimmed and the corridors grew silent, he dreamed of that hidden chamber. In his sleep, it was vast and filled with dragon figurines that moved of their own accord. Glowing in the torchlight, strange maps lined the walls, each depicting a different vision of Westeros, some covered in ice, others scorched by fire. He heard voices whisper in a language he did not recognize. When he awoke, heart pounding, the room was dark except for the faint moonlight through the window. He sat up, breathing raggedly, trying to recall the fragments of the dream. They slipped away from him, leaving only a tingling sense that something important had hovered just beyond his grasp. He rose and approached the narrow window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. Dragonstone's courtyard lay still below, the battlements outlined by faint moon glow. Not even the gulls cried at this hour. He felt alone yet strangely comforted by the fortress's stony presence. Inside these walls, it had always known safety, love. But beyond them stretched a world that teetered on the brink of conflict, if the rumors were true. And behind hidden doors within the castle itself might lie answers to questions he couldn't yet frame. In the morning, he found Rhaenys waiting in the corridor, a mischievous gleam in her eyes. She tugged on his sleeve, whispering that she'd discovered an old tapestry near the tower stairs that showed dragons fighting knights. She insisted he come see it. They scurried away, ignoring the servants who tried to direct them to breakfast. For a time, they lost themselves in childish wonder, studying the faded threads that depicted a chaotic battle scene. Rhaenys concocted a grand story about how she and Jaehaerys would one day reenact the fight with real dragons and real knights. He laughed, though quietly, pulled along by her exuberance. By mid-morning, Maester Culliper rounded them up for lessons in the library. His patient voice guided them through geography, quizzing them on key landmarks and the exports of each region. Rhaenys answered confidently about Dorne's trade in spices and wines, while Jaehaerys recited from memory the major ports in the Crownlands and the Vale. The Maester nodded approvingly, awarding them each a small sweet from a tin in his pocket. When the lesson concluded, Culliper handed Jaehaerys a new scroll. This one details the lineages of the great houses. Study it well. Jaehaerys took it with a murmur of thanks, though lineages had always confused him. So many names, so many alliances and betrayals. They left the library, Rhaenys skipping ahead. Halfway along the corridor they spotted Elia speaking quietly with Sir Willem. Her face looked more drawn than usual, lines of worry framing her eyes. On seeing the children, She offered a weary smile. "Come, we're to have an early meal in my solar. Your father wishes to join us before he departs." Rhaenys's eyebrows shot up. "Departs? Where?" Elia's answer was carefully measured. "He must ride to King's Landing for a short time. He'll be safe, I promise." At that, Rhaenys glanced at Jaehaerys, her excitement replaced by concern. They followed Elia to her solar, a comfortably appointed room, where the fireplace crackled and a table was laid with bread, cold meats, and fruit tarts. Rhaegar arrived soon after, dressed for travel in subdued colors, a dark cloak folded over his arm. He looked tired, but when Rhaenys and Jaehaerys rushed to him, he scooped them both into a gentle embrace. Elia stood nearby, her hands clasped. A quiet tension underscored the gathering. Rhaegar explained that the king had summoned him. He reassured the children he would return soon, that they needn't worry. Jaehaerys noticed a flicker in Rhaegar's violet eyes that betrayed uncertainty. Despite his soothing words, they ate together, conversation muted. Rhaenys tried to lighten the mood by mentioning her sword drills, how she'd improved her stance. Rhaegar patted her hand, telling her to continue her practice diligently. When the meal ended, Rhaegar knelt before Jaehaerys. He rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I leave you in charge of looking after your mother and sister," he said gently. "Do you think you can manage that?" Jaehaerys swallowed, nodding. "Yes, father." Rhaegar's expression softened at that word. "Father." And he pulled Jaehaerys into a brief hug. Then he stood, donned his cloak, and left with Sir Willem to mount up in the courtyard. Elia took the children to the gallery overlooking the yard, where they watched him ride out with a small escort. The gates clanked shut behind them, and the clopping of hooves echoed off the walls. Rhaenys squeezed Jaehaerys' hand, her own trembling. He tightened his grip, a silent promise that they would hold fast together. The days that followed felt oddly hollow without Rhaegar's presence. The castle still bustled, but a note of uncertainty lingered in the corridors. In the anxious looks the servants exchanged, word came that tensions in King's Landing were mounting, that the king's temper had flared again. Elia took to pacing her chambers, sending and receiving ravens more frequently than before. Rhaenys tried to draw her mother into play, to distract her, but Elia could not fully hide her worry. Jaehaerys buried himself in his studies. He read the lineage's scroll and reread the Valyrian tome, his mind seeking escape in the tapestry of history. When not reading, he accompanied Rhaenys to the courtyard for training, though neither child could muster the same enthusiasm. Each day they waited for a raven to arrive with news from Rhaegar. Each day they drifted through the fortress with an undercurrent of tension that refused to ease. One evening, Jaehaerys found Elia gazing from a tower window, her dark hair unbound around her shoulders, a letter clutched in her hand. Outside, clouds gathered across the moon, threatening rain. She turned at his approach, eyes glistening. He hesitated, but she beckoned him forward, drawing him close. He felt her warmth against the chill in the air. For a moment, they stood like that, silently comforting each other. She spoke at last in a hushed voice. "The realm is a fragile thing, my sweet boy, and sometimes all we have is the love we bear each other." Her arms tightened around him, a gentle embrace that told him she feared more than she dared say. He wondered if there were more secrets, more burdens she carried, ones she might never explain. But in that moment, her motherly warmth was enough. The storm broke shortly after midnight, pounding Dragonstone with wind and rain. The sea crashed against the rocks, sending foamy spray high. Jaehaerys lay awake, staring at the shadows dancing across the ceiling as lightning flickered. He thought of Rhaegar riding through the downpour somewhere on the road to King's Landing, or perhaps already within the Red Keep. He thought of Oberyn, of the locked chamber in the depths of the fortress, of dragons slumbering in ancient stone vaults. In the swirl of thunder, he closed his eyes and felt the hush of secrets pressing in from every side, as real as the walls that sheltered him. Morning arrived gray and cold, but the storm had passed. Jaehaerys dressed quickly and ventured to the great hall, where the servants were already bustling. He found Rhaenys standing by a window, arms folded, gaze pinned on the courtyard gate. She turned when she heard him, her eyes hopeful. "Any word?" she asked. "None," Jaehaerys said quietly. She exhaled, disappointed. He'll come home soon. He must. They lingered there, siblings bound by the same mixture of worry and longing. Outside, Dragonstone's walls gleamed with rainwater. The wind had a sharp edge, but at least the thunder was gone. For the moment, the fortress was calm, a citadel against the uncertain world beyond. Yet both children felt a subtle shift, as though the tapestry of their lives was being tugged in an unfamiliar direction. Elia joined them a while later, composed but subdued. She led them to the breakfast table, insisting they keep a routine. They ate boiled eggs and crusty bread in relative silence. The maester arrived with small tidings, ship sightings, minor news from the port. All of it felt inconsequential compared to the question of Rhaegar's safety. When the children finished, Elia dismissed them to their lessons, urging them not to fret. Rhaenys nodded dutifully, though her eyes stayed on the door, as if expecting her father to walk through at any moment. That afternoon, the fortress received a small trading vessel from across the narrow sea. Merchants arrived with barrels of olives, casks of wine, and jars of exotic spices. Jaehaerys watched from a parapet as the goods were unloaded. The smell of foreign spices tickled his nose even from a distance, reminding him of Oberyn's flamboyant presence. For a fleeting moment, he imagined himself traveling across those waters, visiting distant lands. Then the worry for Rhaegar returned, weighing him down like a wet cloak. 2 days later, a raven arrived at dawn. Elia read the message in private before calling the children to her. Her relief was evident, though guarded. "Your father is in King's Landing, safe for now," she told them, voice trembling with pent-up emotion. "He writes that he'll return as soon as matters permit." Rhaenys broke into a grin, but Jaehaerys studied Elia's expression. He saw a shadow there, an unspoken fear. Maybe the letter had revealed more than she shared. Maybe things at court were darker than the short message hinted. Still, at least they knew Rhaegar was unharmed. For the next few days, the castle's tension eased marginally, though Elia remained vigilant, sending out ravens of her own, pacing in the solar as she dictated quiet instructions to a scribe. Jaehaerys continued his secret explorations. The memory of that chamber below the castle haunted his thoughts. One afternoon, he slipped away from a drowsy reading session with Maester Culliper and returned to the lower levels, the same route he had taken before. This time, he found the corridor deserted, and the door to that chamber was closed. A tiny coil of disappointment stirred in him. Part of him had hoped to slip inside again, to search for more clues. Yet the door was not only shut, but bolted from the outside with a new iron latch. He tested it gently. It did not budge. He stood there, listening to the faint drip of water from somewhere in the darkness, wondering who had discovered the chamber and locked it. Was it Rhaegar, one of the knights, or some unseen presence that lingered in the castle's hidden depths? The urge to solve this puzzle pressed on him, but he could do nothing except turn away. As he made his way back up the stairs, he felt the shadows cling to him like cobwebs. When he emerged into the upper corridors, he nearly collided with Rhaenys, who was coming around a corner in search of him. "There you are," she said, slightly breathless. "Mother wants us in the solar. I think she's had word again from King's Landing." He followed her at once, heart quickening. In the solar, Elia stood at a table, reading a letter with a furrowed brow. She dismissed the servant who had delivered it, beckoning the children closer. The day's light streamed through the windows, illuminating the faint lines of concern on her face. She looked up, her expression a mixture of warmth and fatigue. "Your father remains well," she said quietly. "He sends his love and asks that you both keep up with your studies and training. He also hopes to resolve matters soon." Her voice caught on the last words, as though she worried about that resolution. She folded the letter and pressed it to her heart. "He'll be home when he can," she added, softer. Rhaenys sighed. Relief and impatience mingled on her features. "I'm tired of waiting." Elia managed a faint smile, lifting a hand to smooth her daughter's hair. "Waiting can be difficult, but we must trust in him." Jaehaerys nodded along, though he too felt a tightening in his chest. Rhaegar's absence stretched like a shadow across their daily life. Even the courtyard drills felt subdued, as if the castle itself was holding its breath. He longed for the reassurance of his father's presence, the gentle encouragement in his eyes whenever he watched the children train or study. At night, Jaehaerys' dreams returned, filled with storm clouds and flickers of dragonfire. Sometimes he heard snatches of a distant melody, like a harp played in a far-off chamber. Days bled into weeks. Reports came from King's Landing that the king was displeased with certain lords, that tension simmered within the Red Keep. Elia refused to share details with the children, yet her pale face and restless nights told them enough. Rhaenys tried to keep upbeat, often dragging Jaehaerys into her games, but he sensed her own worry. Maester Culliper gently encouraged them to focus on their lessons, to find solace in routine. Sir Willem led them in sword drills with extra care, as though channeling their pent-up anxiety into structured practice. Still, each evening ended with the question unspoken. When would Rhaegar return? A new moon rose in the sky, casting minimal light on Dragonstone. By then, the autumn chill crept into the fortress, and fireplaces crackled in every occupied room. One crisp morning, the castle gates swung open to admit a column of riders. From the highest tower, a sentry blew a horn announcing their arrival. Elia, who had been in her solar, dashed to the courtyard, children in tow. The stones echoed with the clatter of hooves and the exhalations of horses. In the midst of the escort rode Rhaegar, cloak damp with early morning dew, silver hair disheveled from the journey. Jaehaerys felt his chest tighten with relief. Rhaenys reached him first, nearly knocking him off his horse, with an impulsive hug. Servants rushed to assist, and Rhaegar dismounted. Elia stood a step back, composure cracking just enough to show the raw emotion in her eyes. Rhaegar embraced her, murmuring words only she could hear. Then he turned to Jaehaerys, who stood quietly, hands knotted together. A smile broke across Rhaegar's tired face. He pulled the boy close, the smell of travel and damp wool enveloping them both. "I missed you all," Rhaegar said softly. He touched Jaehaerys' cheek, then looked around at the courtyard as though reacquainting himself with the fortress. "It's good to be home." He seemed older, more worn, as if the burdens of King's Landing had carved deeper lines into his features. But a warmth still lived in his gaze, especially when it settled on his family. Around them, stable hands and knights moved to see to the horses, to gather the riders' packs. A hum of subdued excitement spread through the servants. Prince Rhaegar's return meant life might return to a steadier rhythm, if only for a while. They ushered him inside, servants bustling to bring refreshments. Rhaenys peppered him with questions about King's Landing, the feasts, the tournaments, whether he'd seen Uncle Oberyn. Rhaegar answered patiently, though he kept his replies light. Yes, he had seen Oberyn. Yes, King's Landing remained crowded and noisy. No, there had been no grand tournaments, only minor duels. Elia hovered close, listening for any hidden meaning in his words. Jaehaerys sensed that the real stories lay beneath the surface. Even so, he felt an enormous relief just to have his father's presence near again. In the privacy of Elia's solar, once the initial flurry of greetings subsided, Rhaegar gathered them all. Elia, Rhaenys, and Jaehaerys. A fire burned brightly, chasing away the chill. He looked each of them in the eye, searching for something. For a moment, no one spoke. Then he released a heavy breath. "The realm stands on a knife's edge," he said quietly, addressing Elia but also including the children. "The king, he grows more erratic. Lords mutter behind closed doors. War hovers like a vulture, waiting for the first sign of weakness." Elia's face tightened. She glanced at Rhaenys, who clung to her father's arm with wide eyes. Jaehaerys stood very still, absorbing every word, a subdued fear creeping over him. He had never heard Rhaegar speak so plainly about war. Rhaegar continued, voice grave. "I pray it never comes to that, but I must prepare. I cannot stand idle as the king's decisions threaten to tear the realm apart." Elia nodded, swallowing. "I know," she whispered, stepping forward. She touched his cheek, her own eyes brimming with concern. "We'll stand with you, whatever may come." Rhaenys and Jaehaerys exchanged a glance, neither fully comprehending the weight of the conversation but both sensing its importance. Jaehaerys' mind flicked to the old war room beneath the castle, dusty and unused. He wondered if Rhaegar knew of it, if he might one day find use for such a place, if war truly came. The idea made his stomach twist. Rhaegar seemed to notice their anxiety. He softened his tone, drawing Rhaenys into a gentle hug and reaching out for Jaehaerys. The children leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. He spoke calmly. "We will do our best. We are Targaryens and Martells both. Our blood ties, our alliances, they are not easily broken." Elia watched them, her hands clasped to her chest. "We should retire these fears for now," she said, her voice carrying a tired kindness. "Let us have a moment of peace here in Dragonstone. The children have missed you terribly." Rhaegar placed a kiss on Elia's forehead, then rose, gathering himself. "Yes," he said, voice momentarily lighter. "I'd like nothing more than to rest, to play my harp again, to see how well Jaehaerys has advanced with his sword." Rhaenys piped up. "I've improved too, father. Sir Willem says I might soon be better than Jaehaerys." Rhaegar laughed softly. "Then I'll have to spar with you both and see for myself." In that fleeting moment, the tension in the room ebbed, replaced by something resembling normalcy. Elia summoned a servant to bring food and drink, fussing over Rhaegar's travel-worn state. Rhaenys rattled off every small adventure that had occurred in his absence. Her needlework fiascos. A funny story of a cat that had stolen a piece of fish from the kitchens. The day the wind was so strong, it nearly blew her off the parapet. Jaehaerys joined in, though more quietly, remarking on their lessons and a few training sessions. He left out any mention of the hidden chamber or his disquieting dreams. Night fell with a gentle hush. Lanterns glowed in the hallways, and a sense of calm pervaded the fortress, at least for now. Outside, the sea lapped at the shore, the tide rising under a sky sprinkled with stars. In the children's chamber, Rhaenys soon drifted off to sleep, worn out from excitement. Jaehaerys lingered by the window, watching the pale moon glimmer on the dark water. He felt a faint tremor of worry for the future, but also a seed of comfort, knowing Rhaegar was back. Whatever storms brewed beyond Dragonstone, tonight, the family was together. He climbed into bed at last, nestling under blankets embroidered with the Targaryen sigil. In the quiet, he closed his eyes, thinking of Oberyn's parting words. Keep reading, keep learning, and of the secrets locked away in this old castle. He thought of dragons, slumbering in legends, and possibly in dreams. Slowly, his breathing eased. The corridors outside were still. The hush of Dragonstone wrapped him in a warm lullaby, a promise that for this night, at least, he was safe. In the darkness, the flicker of a dream beckoned, and he let himself drift toward it, wondering what secrets tomorrow would bring.